They say the biggest mistake in galactic military history wasn't starting a war, it was assuming the quiet cadet from the Death World wouldn't fight back. 3 shots were fired that day in the training hall. All 3 missed their intended target. What happened next would reshape everything the Galactic Federation thought they knew about humans, protocol, and the thin line between restraint and retribution. The Vraxan Military Academy orbited the gas giant Kelmora Prime, a massive station that had trained the finest soldiers in the Galactic Federation for 300 standard cycles. Its gleaming corridors stretched for kilometers, housing cadets from 47 different species, each representing the best their worlds could offer. The station itself was a marvel of engineering, with gravity generators adjusted to accommodate species ranging from the feather-light Sylphine to the dense-boned Carathians. Commander Telvik stood at the observation deck, watching the latest batch of cadets file into the combat training hall, his 3 eyes scanning each one with practiced precision. The training hall was enormous, a circular arena spanning 200 meters in diameter, with walls that could project any environment imaginable. Today it displayed a simple grey grid pattern, standard for weapon qualification assessments. Around the perimeter, senior instructors stood at attention, their various forms creating a tapestry of galactic diversity. Telvik noticed them all, but his attention kept returning to one particular cadet near the back of the formation. Cadet Marcus Chen stood at parade rest among his classmates, his posture correct but somehow different from the others. Where most cadets held themselves with the nervous energy of youth facing evaluation, the human seemed almost relaxed. His brown eyes scanned the hall with quiet attention, taking in details most would miss. At first glance, he appeared unremarkable compared to the more physically impressive species around him. The Carathian cadets towered over him by nearly a meter, their crystalline skin glinting under the artificial lights. The Vraxan students, including Telvik's own nephew, stood with the natural grace of apex predators, their scaled bodies rippling with efficient muscle. Marcus Chen was, by most galactic standards, average. He stood roughly 1.8 meters tall, with the medium build common to his species. His dark hair was cut in the regulation style, short and neat. His uniform fit properly but without the tailored precision some wealthier cadets could afford. Nothing about him screamed exceptional, yet Telvik had learned over his 30 cycles as an instructor that appearances meant little when it came to Deathworlders. The term Deathworlder was not an insult in Federation military circles, though some civilians used it as such. It was a simple classification for beings who evolved on high-gravity, high-danger worlds. Earth, humanity's homeworld, rated a 7.3 on the Hazard Index, putting it in the top 5th percentile of dangerous inhabited worlds. The humans who emerged from such an environment carried traits that sometimes caught other species off guard. "Cadets, attention!" The voice belonged to Instructor Vrel, a Carathian whose career spanned 5 decades of military service. The hall fell silent instantly. 300 young beings from dozens of worlds standing in perfect formation. Today's evaluation is simple. Weapon accuracy under standard combat stress. Each of you will fire at designated targets while the environment simulates various battlefield conditions. Your scores will determine your ranking and marksmanship for this cycle. Marcus listened without visible reaction, though his mind was already running through the drills he had practiced 1,000 times. The weapon they would use was the standard Federation pulse rifle, a reliable energy weapon that most species could operate effectively. He had qualified with it weeks ago, scoring in the acceptable range. Nothing spectacular, but nothing concerning. Today was supposed to be a formality. The cadets were organized into firing groups of 10, each group taking their turn at the range while others observed. Marcus found himself in the 7th group, which meant nearly an hour of waiting. He used the time as he always did, watching and learning. Each species approached the weapon differently. The Vraxan cadets, with their superior reflexes, fired with lightning speed but sometimes sacrificed accuracy for pace. The Carathians, methodical and patient, took their time and rarely missed. The Sylphine, whose hollow bones and light frames made recoil management challenging, had developed techniques to brace themselves effectively. When his group was finally called forward, Marcus moved with the quiet efficiency that characterized most of his actions. He took his position at Station 7, checked his weapon with practiced hands, and waited for the simulation to begin. Around him, his fellow cadets did the same, some with visible nervousness, others with cocky confidence. The target appeared 50 meters downrange, a standard humanoid silhouette that would move and react according to the simulation's programming. Marcus raised his rifle, settling into a comfortable stance that accounted for his species' bipedal balance and shoulder structure. The simulation began with a simple, standing shot. He fired. The pulse struck the target center mass. Around him, 9 other shots rang out in a staggered chorus. The simulation increased in complexity. Targets appeared at varying distances and angles. Environmental conditions changed, introducing factors like simulated wind, low visibility, and unstable footing. Marcus worked through each scenario with methodical calm, his scores consistent if not outstanding. He was aware of the Vraxan cadet 3 stations to his left, a student named Zavik, who had made no secret of his disdain for humans in general, and Marcus in particular. Zavik came from a prominent military family, his father a decorated admiral in the Federation fleet. He carried himself with the arrogance of inherited prestige, his scaled features often twisted into expressions of contempt when he looked at species he deemed inferior. He had targeted Marcus from the first week of academy training, small harassments and verbal jabs that Marcus had ignored with practiced patience. In the hierarchy of academy politics, Zavik had allies and influence. Marcus had neither, just the quiet reputation of someone who did his work and didn't cause trouble. The final scenario of the qualification was the most challenging. Multiple targets would appear simultaneously at varying distances, some hostile and some civilian, requiring split-second identification and engagement decisions. Marcus focused on his breathing, letting his heart rate settle into the calm rhythm he had learned growing up on Earth. On a world where the wildlife could kill you in 100 different ways, humans developed an instinct for staying calm under pressure. The simulation activated. 3 targets materialized, 2 hostile flanking, 1 civilian. Marcus identified, prioritized, and fired in one smooth motion. Both hostile targets registered hits. He shifted to acquire the next set of targets when something felt wrong. A sound, barely audible under the pulse fire, a whisper of movement that didn't match the simulation pattern. Training and instinct moved Marcus before conscious thought could catch up. He shifted his weight, dropping into a lower stance as 3 pulse shots screamed through the space where his head had been a fraction of a second earlier. The shots, clearly not part of the simulation, struck the wall behind him with bright flashes of dissipating energy. The training hall erupted into chaos as alarms blared and the simulation froze mid-sequence. Marcus didn't freeze. His body responded with the fluid efficiency of someone whose species had spent millions of years as both predator and prey. He spun toward the source of the shots, his rifle already tracking even as his mind processed what had happened. 50 meters to his left, Zavik stood at his firing station, his weapon still raised and pointed in Marcus's direction. The Vraxan's eyes were wide, not with fear but with fury at having missed. "Cease fire! All cadets, weapons down!" Instructor Vrel's voice cut through the confusion like a blade. All around the hall, cadets were lowering their weapons, looking confused and alarmed. Marcus lowered his rifle slowly, his eyes never leaving Zavik. The Vraxan cadet was being surrounded by instructors, his weapon being taken from his hands. Commander Telvik had descended from the observation deck, his 3 eyes narrowed as he assessed the situation. He saw the scorch marks on the wall where the shots had struck, calculated the angle, and traced the trajectory back to where Marcus had been standing. The human cadet had moved, Telvik realized, with professional appreciation. 3 shots at close range from a qualified marksman, and the human had evaded all 3 through sheer reaction speed. "Cadet Zavik, you will come with me immediately," Telvik commanded, his voice cold with controlled anger. He turned to Marcus. "Cadet Chen, remain here. Instructor Vrel will escort you to the medical bay for examination." Marcus wanted to protest that he didn't need medical attention, but years of discipline kept his mouth shut. He nodded once, handing his weapon to the range officer before following Vrel out of the training hall. Behind them, the other cadets were being dismissed, their shocked conversations already spreading through the station's communication networks. The medical bay was quiet and clinical, staffed by a Sylphine doctor whose gentle manipulation of diagnostic equipment contrasted with her stern demeanor. She scanned Marcus thoroughly, checking for any physiological stress responses or injuries. "Your heart rate is elevated, but returning to normal parameters," she observed, her voice carrying the musical quality common to her species. "You show no signs of trauma or injury. What you do show is remarkable reaction time." "I just moved," Marcus said simply. "Just moved," the doctor repeated, her tone suggesting she found that explanation insufficient. "Cadet, the station's sensors recorded the entire incident. You began your evasive movement 0.03 seconds after Cadet Zavik altered his firing angle. That is faster than most species' conscious reaction time. Marcus didn't know what to say to that. On Earth, reacting quickly to danger wasn't exceptional. It was survival. The fact that humans could process and respond to threats faster than many other species was something he had learned here at the Academy, but it still felt normal to him. "May I return to my quarters?" he asked instead. The doctor studied him for a moment longer, before nodding. "You are cleared medically. Commander Telvik has requested you report to his office at 1800. Until then, you are confined to quarters pending investigation." The walk back to the cadet dormitory gave Marcus time to think. The Academy operated on a strict honor code, and attempted violence against a fellow cadet was one of the most serious violations possible. Zavik would face consequences, that much was certain. But Marcus knew from experience that being the victim didn't always mean being believed, especially when the perpetrator had family connections and influence. His quarters were small but adequate, a single room with a bunk, desk, and personal storage locker. He sat on the bunk and stared at the wall, trying to understand what had just happened. Zavik had deliberately tried to kill him. Not hurt him, not intimidate him, kill him. 3 shots to where his head had been, any one of which would have been fatal. The casual malice of it was harder to process than the physical danger had been. A chime at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter!" he called, expecting perhaps an instructor or academy official. Instead, Cadet Lyra Thesson stepped through the doorway. Odd. She was Carathian, her crystalline features reflecting the room's light in subtle patterns. She had never spoken to Marcus directly before, though they shared several classes. "I saw what happened," Lyra said without preamble. "In the training hall." "Zarvik tried to kill you." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yeah, he did. I wanted you to know that I witnessed it clearly. When they interview witnesses, I will tell them exactly what I saw." She paused, her crystalline hand gripping the doorframe. "Zavik has been spreading rumors that you provoked him, that he fired in self-defense. It's already starting in the cadet networks." Of course it was. Marcus felt a weight settle in his chest, the familiar heaviness of fighting an uphill battle. "Thank you for telling me," he said. Lyra studied him with her multifaceted eyes. "You moved before he fired. I have never seen anyone move that fast." "How did you know?" "I didn't know," Marcus admitted. "I just felt something was wrong. On Earth, we learned to trust that feeling." She nodded as if that explained something, then left as abruptly as she had arrived. Marcus sat in the quiet of his quarters, watching the chronometer count down the hours until his meeting with Commander Telvik. Outside his window, the rings of Kelmora Prime rotated in their eternal dance, beautiful and indifferent to the small dramas playing out in the station that orbited above them. At precisely 1800 hours, Marcus stood outside Commander Telvik's office. The door chimed his presence and slid open, revealing a space that was more museum than workspace. Artifacts from dozens of cultures lined the walls, tokens of a long career spent among the stars. Telvik sat behind a curved desk that seemed to grow from the floor itself, organic in design despite being clearly manufactured. "Sit, Cadet Chen." Telvik gestured to a chair that adjusted automatically to Marcus's physiology. "We need to discuss what happened today." Marcus sat, his posture correct but not rigid. "Yes, sir. 3 shots were fired at you by Cadet Zavik. According to sensor logs and witness testimony, you evaded all 3 and responded by tracking the source with your own weapon, which you then lowered when ordered." Telvik's 3 eyes studied Marcus with unsettling intensity. "Most beings would have frozen, or fired back, or panicked. You did none of these things." "Explain." "Training, sir," Marcus said. "And instinct." "Instinct," Telvik repeated. "Tell me, Cadet Chen, what would you have done if I had not ordered weapons down?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Marcus considered his answer carefully. "I would have assessed whether Cadet Zavik was continuing to present a lethal threat. If yes, I would have responded appropriately. If no, I would have maintained my position and awaited further orders." "Responded appropriately," Telvik said softly. "That is a very diplomatic way of saying you would have shot him." "Only if he continued to present a lethal threat, sir." Telvik leaned back in his chair, a gesture that seemed almost human despite his alien physiology. I have been an instructor at this academy for 30 cycles, Cadet Chen. I have trained soldiers from 47 different species. I have seen bravery and cowardice, brilliance and stupidity, honor and treachery. But I have never seen what I saw today. Do you know what that was? Restraint, Telvik said. You had every right, legally and morally, to defend yourself with lethal force. Zavik had attempted to kill you, yet you chose not to fire back. Why? Marcus thought about his answer, trying to find words for something he barely understood himself. Because it would have escalated the situation, sir. Because other cadets were in the hall and could have been caught in crossfire. Because killing Zavik wouldn't have made me safer. It would have just made me a killer. And if you had been alone? If there had been no witnesses, no instructors, no one to order weapons down? I still wouldn't have killed him if I could avoid it, sir. Telvik studied him for a long moment. Your species confuses me, Cadet Chen. You come from a world so dangerous that your own historical records are full of conflicts and violence. Yet you sit here telling me you would choose restraint over retaliation. How do I reconcile these things? Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. Marcus chose his words carefully. Earth is dangerous, yes, but humans survived not just because we could fight, but because we knew when not to. Every human child learns that just because you can hurt someone doesn't mean you should. Maybe that's the difference between surviving and thriving, sir. Anyone can kill. It takes more to choose not to. The silence that followed was not uncomfortable, but contemplative. Finally, Telvik nodded. Cadet Zavik has been placed in detention pending a formal tribunal. His father has been notified and is already demanding a full investigation. You will be required to testify about what occurred. I understand, sir. I want you to understand something else, Cadet Chen. What happened today was not your fault. Zavik acted with malice and premeditation. However, there are those who will try to twist the narrative, to make you seem like the aggressor, or to diminish what occurred. Political pressure will be applied. Do you understand what I am telling you? Ah. Zavik's father was an admiral. Marcus was the son of 2 civilian engineers from a relatively new Federation member world. The scales were already tipped. Yes, sir, I understand. Good. Telvik stood, a gesture that ended the meeting. You are confined to quarters when not in class until the tribunal concludes. Dismissed. Marcus stood and saluted, then left the office. The corridors of the academy felt different now. Hostile in a way they hadn't before. He could feel eyes on him, cadets whispering as he passed. By morning, everyone would have their own version of what had happened, most of them wrong. Back in his quarters, Marcus lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling. He thought about home, about Earth's yellow sun and blue skies, about his parents who had been so proud when he received his acceptance to the academy. He wondered what they would say about today, whether they would tell him he had done the right thing or question his restraint. He thought about Zavik in detention, probably planning his defense, probably confident that his family connections would protect him from real consequences. Most of all, Marcus thought about those 3 shots and the choice he had made in the fraction of a second after they missed. He had trained for combat, had learned to be a soldier, had accepted that might someday mean taking a life in service of the Federation. But in that moment, with every right to fire back, he had chosen not to. He didn't know if that made him strong or weak, wise or foolish. What he did know was that whatever happened next, whatever the tribunal decided, whatever consequences followed, he would have to live with his choices. That was something else humans learned on their dangerous world. You lived with your choices, good or bad, right or wrong. You carried them, and you moved forward. Outside his window, Kelmora Prime continued its endless rotation. And somewhere on that massive station, the machinery of military justice began to turn, grinding toward a resolution that would affect more than just 2 cadets. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight, Marcus just needed to sleep. The tribunal convened 3 days after the incident in a formal hearing chamber deep within the Academy's administrative section. The room was circular, designed to accommodate the varied physiologies of Federation species, with seating arranged in concentric rings around a central platform. Marcus sat in the designated area for the accused party, though technically he was the victim, not the defendant. The terminology felt deliberately vague, as if someone wanted to blur the lines of who had actually done wrong. The tribunal panel consisted of 3 senior officers, each representing different branches of the Federation military. Admiral Korvax, a grizzled Vraxan with scales that had faded to silver with age, sat at the center. To his left was General Marif, a Carathian whose crystalline features suggested both wisdom and inflexibility. To his right sat Commander Salas, a Silthene whose small frame belied a reputation for tactical brilliance that had earned her decorations from a dozen campaigns. These three would decide what happened next. Marcus had been assigned a legal advocate, a young Carathian officer named Renz, who seemed competent but clearly uncomfortable with the political dimensions of the case. They had met twice before the hearing, and Renz had been blunt in his assessment. The evidence was clear, the witnesses were credible, and under normal circumstances, Zavik would face severe consequences, including expulsion and possible criminal charges. These were not normal circumstances. Admiral Varkas, Zavik's father, had arrived at the station within hours of the incident. He was a formidable presence, his scaled bulk and decorated uniform commanding immediate respect. He had brought his own legal team, 3 civilian lawyers whose expertise in military law made Renz look like an amateur. They had immediately begun filing motions, questioning procedures, and building a narrative that bore little resemblance to what had actually happened. The hearing chamber filled with observers, cadets, instructors, and station personnel packed the viewing galleries. This was the most significant disciplinary action the Academy had seen in years, and everyone wanted to witness it. Marcus could feel the weight of their attention. Hundreds of eyes from dozens of species, all focused on the drama playing out below. "This tribunal is now in session," Admiral Korvax announced, his voice carrying easily through the chamber's acoustic design. "We are here to determine the facts surrounding an incident that occurred in Training Hall 7, wherein Cadet Zavik fired his weapon at Cadet Chen during a qualification exercise. Cadet Zavik, please stand." Zavik rose from his seat across the chamber. He wore his dress uniform, every crease perfect, every decoration precisely placed. He stood with the bearing of someone who had never doubted his place in the hierarchy, someone who expected deference as his birthright. His eyes briefly met Marcus's, and in that glance was pure contempt. "Cadet Zavik, you are charged with attempted assault on a fellow cadet, unauthorized use of a weapon, and conduct unbecoming of a Federation officer. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, sir." Zavik's voice was firm and clear. A murmur ran through the observation galleries. The evidence was overwhelming, witnessed by dozens of people and recorded by station censors. A not guilty plea meant this would not be a simple admission and sentencing. This would be a fight. Admiral Korvax nodded, as if he had expected this. "Very well. The prosecution may present its case." The senior prosecutor was a Vraxan officer named Telerik, no relation to Commander Telvik despite the similar names. He approached the central platform with a data pad containing the compiled evidence. "Honored Tribunal, the facts of this case are straightforward." At 1400 hours on the date in question, Cadet Jarvik deliberately altered his firing angle during a qualification exercise and discharged his weapon 3 times at Cadet Chen's position. Station sensors recorded the incident from multiple angles. 16 cadets and 4 instructors witnessed the event. The shots were not part of the simulation and were fired with lethal intent. Teltrick activated a holographic display that showed the training hall from an overhead view. Marcus watched himself appear as a small figure at Firing Station 7. The simulation played out in accelerated time, showing the progression of the qualification exercise. Then, highlighted in red, Zavik's figure turned, his weapon tracking away from his designated targets and toward Marcus. 3 quick pulses of light. 3 shots that would have killed if they had connected. The display also showed, in slower motion, Marcus's reaction. His body shifted, dropping and moving with fluid speed that looked almost supernatural when slowed down. The shots passed through empty air where he had been standing a fraction of a second before. "As you can see," Telric continued, "Cadet Zavik's actions were deliberate and unprovoked. Cadet Chen's only action was to evade and then track the source of fire, which is standard defensive protocol. He did not return fire despite having legal justification to do so." One of Zavik's lawyers, a distinguished-looking Korathian named Vesh, rose smoothly. "If I may address the tribunal." Admiral Korvax nodded permission. "The prosecution's presentation is incomplete," Vesh said, his voice smooth and confident. "It shows what happened, but not why. Context matters in any military action. We do not dispute that my client fired his weapon. What we dispute is the characterization of that action as assault, rather than justified response to a perceived threat." Marcus felt his advocate Renz stiffen beside him. This was the defense strategy they had anticipated. the twisting of facts into a narrative where somehow the victim became the aggressor. Cadet Chen, Besh continued, pacing around the central platform like a professor delivering a lecture, is what we commonly refer to as a Deathworlder. His homeworld, Earth, is classified as extremely hazardous on the Federation scale. Beings from such worlds often display behavioral patterns that other species find threatening or aggressive. Is it not possible that Cadet Zavik, responding to subliminal cues of danger from a Deathworlder in close proximity during a high-stress exercise, reacted with the reflexes of a trained soldier responding to a threat? It was brilliant rhetoric, Marcus had to admit. It took the fact of Earth's danger rating and weaponized it, turning human evolutionary adaptations into evidence of inherent threat. It ignored completely that Marcus had done nothing threatening, had in fact been engaged in the exact same activity as every other cadet in the hall. Telric objected immediately. There is no evidence whatsoever that Cadet Chen displayed any threatening behavior. This is pure speculation designed to justify unjustifiable actions. Is it speculation? Vesh countered. Or is it acknowledgement of documented differences in how species perceive threat? I would like to call an expert witness, Dr. Halvorn, a xenopsychologist specializing in human behavioral patterns. The tribunal allowed it, and Dr. Halvorn took the witness platform. He was an elderly Sylphene, his frail appearance contrasting with the weight his credentials carried. He had published extensively on human psychology and was considered an authority on the subject. Vesh led him through a series of questions designed to establish that humans, by nature of their evolutionary background, displayed unconscious behaviors that other species might interpret as threatening. The doctor, whether through genuine belief or careful coaching, painted a picture of humans as unpredictable beings whose death-world origins made them fundamentally different from peaceful species. Marcus listened with growing frustration as his entire species was characterized as latent threats. He thought about his parents, both gentle people who had never raised a hand in anger. He thought about his childhood friends, the teachers who had mentored him, the neighbors who had helped his family when times were hard. None of them were threats. They were just people trying to live their lives. When it was time for cross-examination, Teleric approached Dr. Barth, Halvorn with visible skepticism. Doctor, you have presented a theory about human behavioral patterns. Can you point to any specific action by Cadet Chen that day that would justify Cadet Shavik's response? Dr. Halvorn hesitated. Well, the specific actions would need to be evaluated in context. Yes or no, Doctor? Did Cadet Chen do anything that day that threatened Cadet Zavik? Not overtly, but the subliminal. Yes or no? No, but... Thank you, Doctor. Telek turned to the tribunal. The defense is attempting to justify attempted murder based on species prejudice disguised as science. Cadet Chen did nothing wrong. Cadet Zavik tried to kill him. These are the facts. Everything else is misdirection. The hearing continued for hours. Witnesses were called, both cadets who had been in the training hall and instructors who had observed the incident. Most testified clearly about what they had seen. Zavik deliberately firing at Marcus without provocation. But Vesh was skilled at introducing doubt, asking questions that suggested alternative interpretations, emphasizing the speed of Marcus's reactions as if that somehow proved he had been the real threat. When it was Marcus's turn to testify, he approached the central platform with calm determination. Admiral Korvac studied him with all three eyes. Cadet Chen, please describe in your own words what happened in Training Hall 7. Marcus had prepared for this, had rehearsed with Renz what to say and how to say it. But standing there, under the weight of so much attention, he decided to simply tell the truth as plainly as possible. I was conducting my weapons qualification, sir. Standard scenarios, nothing unusual. I was focused on my targets when I felt something wrong. I can't explain it better than that. Just a feeling. I moved. And then I heard the shots where I had been standing. I turned and saw Cadet Zavik with his weapon pointed at me. I tracked him with my own weapon but did not fire. Then the instructors ordered weapons down, and I complied. You felt something wrong, Admiral Korvax repeated. Can you elaborate on this feeling? Marcus thought about how to explain instinct to beings who might not have the same relationship with danger that humans did. On Earth, sir, the environment teaches you to pay attention to small things. A sound that doesn't fit the pattern, a movement in your peripheral vision, a change in air pressure. These things can mean the difference between life and death. We learn to trust those feelings even when we can't consciously identify what triggered them. So you claim you knew Cadet Zarvik was going to fire before he actually did? No, sir. I knew something was wrong. I reacted to that feeling. It happened to save my life. Vesh rose for cross-examination. Cadet Chen, you describe these instincts as survival mechanisms from your homeworld. Would you say these instincts make you more prone to perceiving threats that don't actually exist? No, sir. They make me more aware of my surroundings. More aware or more paranoid? Objection, Telric said. Argumentative. Sustained. Admiral Kovacs ruled. Vesh shifted his approach. Cadet Chen, in the moment after you evaded the shots, you turned and tracked Cadet Zarvik with your weapon. Why did you do that? Standard defensive protocol, sir. Identify the source of fire and assess whether the threat continues. And if the instructors had not ordered weapons down, would you have fired? Marcus met Vesh's eyes steadily. Only if Cadet Zarvik had continued to present a lethal threat. You mean you would have killed him? I would have defended myself, sir. There is a difference. Is there? A dead body is a dead body, Cadet. Whether you call it defense or murder, the result is the same. The intent is different, Marcus said quietly. Murder is about wanting someone dead. Defense is about wanting to stay alive. I didn't want Cadet Zarvik dead. I just didn't want to die. The exchange continued, Vesh trying to paint Marcus as either an aggressor or a threat, Marcus refusing to be pushed into either characterization. When it finally ended, Marcus returned to his seat feeling exhausted. The emotional weight of having to defend his right to exist without being killed was heavier than any physical burden. The final witness was Cadet Lyra Thesson, the Korathian who had visited Marcus in his quarters after the incident. She testified clearly and without embellishment, describing exactly what she had seen. When Vesh tried to suggest her view might have been obstructed or her memory faulty, she fixed him with her multifaceted eyes and said simply, I know what I saw. Cadet Zarvik tried to murder Cadet Chen. Nothing you say will change that fact. As the hearing moved toward closing arguments, Admiral Varkas, who had been sitting silently in the observer's gallery, finally rose. His presence commanded immediate attention, the weight of his rank and reputation filling the chamber. If I may address the tribunal, he said, his voice carrying the authority of decades in command. Admiral Kovacs looked uncomfortable but nodded permission. Briefly, Admiral. This tribunal is about to make a decision that will affect not just two cadets, but the future of Federation military justice, Varkas said. My son made a mistake. I do not deny that. But young soldiers make mistakes under stress. What matters is how we respond to those mistakes. Destroying my son's career, and by extension, dishonoring my family, over a moment of poor judgment serves no one. Cadet Chen was not harmed. No lasting damage was done. I ask this tribunal to consider the context, the stress of training, the misunderstandings that can occur between species, and render a judgment that acknowledges fault while allowing for redemption. It was a masterful speech, acknowledging just enough to seem reasonable while minimizing the severity of what had actually happened. Marcus watched the tribunal members' faces, trying to read their reactions. Admiral Kovacs remained neutral, but General Marith seemed troubled, and Commander Salis looked distinctly uncomfortable. The tribunal retired to deliberate, leaving the hearing chamber buzzing with speculation. Marcus sat in the silence of his own thoughts. Ren's beside him, but not speaking. They both knew that despite the evidence, despite the witnesses, the political pressure was immense. Admiral Varkas was not just any officer. His influence extended throughout the Federation military. His request for leniency carried weight that could not be easily ignored. 2 hours passed before the tribunal returned. The chamber fell silent as Admiral Kovacs stood to deliver the verdict. Marcus stood as well, his hands clasped behind his back in parade rest position, his face carefully neutral. This tribunal has carefully considered all evidence and testimony, Kovacs began. We find that Cadet Zarvik did deliberately fire his weapon at Cadet Chen without justification. The evidence is clear and the witnesses are credible. However, we also acknowledge that military training involves high-stress situations where split-second decisions are made, sometimes wrongly. We find Cadet Zarvik guilty of unauthorized weapon discharge and conduct unbecoming, but we reduce the charge of attempted assault due to the training environment context. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. The reduction of charges was the first step toward leniency he had feared. Cadet Zarvik is hereby sentenced to 30 days detention, reduction in rank, and mandatory psychological evaluation. Upon successful completion of these requirements, he will be allowed to continue his training with this incident noted in his permanent record. The chamber erupted in reaction, some cadets shouting in protest, others in approval. Marcus stood perfectly still, his face showing nothing of what he felt. 30 days detention for attempted murder. A note in the record that would likely be expunged or ignored when Zavik's family connections came into play. This was what passed for justice when political influence outweighed evidence. This tribunal also acknowledges, Kovacs continued, raising his voice over the noise, the remarkable restraint shown by Cadet Chen in not returning fire when legally justified to do so. His actions demonstrate the kind of judgment and discipline we seek to instill in all Federation officers. Cadet Chen is commended for his conduct and cleared of any wrongdoing. Commended. As if praise made up for the fact that his attempted murderer would be back in classes in a month. Marcus felt Renz's hand on his shoulder, heard his advocate saying something about partial victories and political realities. But Marcus was thinking about something else entirely. He was thinking about the lesson the Federation had just taught him. That evidence didn't matter as much as influence. That attempted murder could be reduced to a training incident if the right people wanted it that way. That being a human, a Deathworlder, meant he would always be slightly suspect, slightly other, regardless of what he did or how he conducted himself. As the chamber cleared and observers filed out still arguing about the verdict, Marcus remained standing at attention until Admiral Kovacs gestured for him to approach the tribunal platform. Up close, the old Vraxen looked tired, his scales dull under the lights. "You are disappointed in this verdict, Cadet Chen," Kovacs said quietly. It was not a question. "I am disappointed in what it represents, sir," Marcus replied, choosing his words carefully. "It represents the reality of military service, Cadet. Politics and justice do not always align. You will learn this many times in your career, if you choose to continue it. With respect, sir, I already knew it. I just hoped I was wrong." Kovacs studied him for a long moment. "Your restraint that day in the training hall was remarkable. Many beings, especially those from high-danger worlds, would have fired back without hesitation. You chose not to. Do you regret that choice?" Marcus thought about it honestly. "No, sir, I don't." "Why not?" "Because," Marcus said slowly, "the person I would be if I had killed Zavik when I didn't have to is not someone I want to be. The verdict doesn't change that. What he did doesn't change that. I made the choice I could live with." Kovacs' expression softened slightly. "Hold on to that principle, Cadet Chen. The galaxy needs soldiers who know when not to pull the trigger as much as it needs those who know when to pull it." Dismissed. Marcus saluted and left the chamber, walking through corridors that still felt hostile despite his official exoneration. He knew word of the verdict would spread quickly, knew that some would see it as vindication of Zavik's actions, others as proof that the system was broken. He knew he would face Zavik again in classes, would have to train alongside someone who had tried to kill him and received only a slap on the wrist. But as he walked, Marcus also knew something else. He had responded to 3 shots fired at wrong target in a way that defined who he was and who he wanted to be. The tribunal's verdict couldn't change that. Neither could Zavik's hatred or the political realities of military justice. He was a Deathworlder, yes, but that meant more than just coming from a dangerous planet. It meant carrying the lessons that planet taught, the restraint and wisdom that came from understanding violence intimately enough to know when to reject it. The station's corridors stretched ahead of him, leading back to his quarters, back to his life as a cadet, back to a future that suddenly seemed more complicated than he had imagined. But Marcus walked forward anyway, one step at a time, the way humans always had. 6 weeks after the tribunal, the academy had settled into an uneasy normalcy. Zavik had completed his detention and returned to regular training rotation, though he was assigned to different squads and schedules that minimized his contact with Marcus. The incident remained a topic of hushed conversation in the cadet mess hall, debated in the quiet corners where young soldiers questioned the justice they were being trained to uphold. Marcus focused on his studies with renewed intensity. If the system wouldn't protect him, he would make himself too competent to ignore. His scores in tactical analysis climbed from acceptable to exceptional. His physical training results improved as he pushed his body harder than before. He volunteered for extra duties, assisted instructors with equipment maintenance, and generally made himself invaluable in the small ways that accumulated into a reputation for reliability. Other cadets had begun to notice. Not just notice his performance, but notice him. Lyra Thesson had appointed herself something between friend and guardian, often appearing at meals or during free time to keep him company. She brought others with her, a small but growing circle of cadets who seemed to have decided that Marcus represented something worth supporting, even if they couldn't quite articulate what that something was. "You have become a symbol," Lyra told him one evening as they studied together in the academy library. Her crystalline fingers traced equations on her datapad while she spoke, "whether you wanted to be or not." Marcus looked up from his own work, a complex strategic simulation he was analyzing for his advanced tactics course. A symbol of what? Of the choice between revenge and restraint, of holding on to principles when the system fails you. She paused, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the library's soft lighting. "Half the cadets think you were weak for not shooting Zavik. The other half think you showed more strength than any of us could have managed." "And which half are you in?" Marcus asked. "I think," Lyra said carefully, "that you showed us what a Federation officer should be. Not just someone who follows orders or applies firepower effectively, but someone who makes hard choices based on who they want to be, not just what they are allowed to do." The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the library entrance. Raised voices echoed through the quiet space, followed by the sharp crack of something breaking. Marcus and Lyra exchanged glances before moving toward the disturbance, joining other cadets who were investigating the noise. They found 3 Vraxan cadets surrounding a lone Sylphine student, their body language aggressive despite not having yet made physical contact. The Sylphine, a first-year cadet named Pix, was backed against a bookshelf, their slight frame trembling. On the floor between them lay the shattered remains of a datapad. "You need to learn your place, Deathworlder sympathizer," one of the Vraxans was saying, his voice low and threatening. "Supporting that human makes you as suspect as he is." Marcus recognized the speaker as Corvin, one of Zavik's close associates. The realization settled over him like cold water. This wasn't random harassment. This was targeted intimidation. And the target had been chosen specifically because of their association with Marcus. Pix had been one of the first cadets to publicly defend Marcus after the tribunal, writing an editorial in the Academy newsletter about justice and accountability. "Step back," Marcus said quietly, his voice cutting through the tension. The Vraxans turned toward him, and Corvin's scaled features twisted into something between a sneer and a smile. "Look who decided to play hero," Corvin said. "The restrained Deathworlder. Come to show us more of that famous human pacifism?" Marcus ignored the taunt, addressing Pix directly. "Are you injured?" Pix shook their head, though their fear was visible in the trembling of their delicate wings. "They destroyed my datapad. My entire semester's work was on it." "Accidents happen," Corvin said with mock innocence. "Maybe you should be more careful with your equipment." Marcus felt anger rising, a hot pressure in his chest that wanted release in action. It would be so easy to wipe that smirk off Corvin's face, to show these bullies what a Deathworlder could really do when pushed. His hands clenched at his sides, muscle memory from years of training suggesting a dozen ways he could end this confrontation decisively. But he thought about the tribunal, about the lesson it had taught him, that he could be provoked, that his reaction to provocation would be used against him, that being a human meant he was already suspect in the eyes of those who wanted to see him that way. Corvin wasn't threatening him by accident. This was a setup, a way to force Marcus into a response that would confirm every prejudice about violent Deathworlders. "We're leaving," Marcus said, placing himself between Pix and the Vraxans. "Pix, come with me." "Running away," Corvin taunted. "I thought Deathworlders were supposed to be tough." Marcus met his eyes steadily. "Being tough doesn't mean being stupid." "Move aside." For a moment, the tension hung in the balance. Corvin clearly wanted to escalate, wanted to push until Marcus responded with violence. But Marcus's calm demeanor, combined with the presence of other cadets who had gathered to watch, made escalation risky. Finally, Corvin stepped aside with exaggerated courtesy. "After you, human. But this isn't over. Sooner or later, you'll show everyone what you really are." Marcus guided Pix away from the confrontation, Lyra and several other cadets forming a protective escort. They found an empty classroom where Pix finally broke down, their small frame shaking with suppressed emotion. "I am sorry," Pix said through their distress. "I should not have written that editorial. I made myself a target, and now I have involved you as well." You didn't involve me, Marcus said gently. You stood up for what was right. That's never something to apologize for. Lyra was already on her communicator, contacting Academy security and filing a report about the harassment. Marcus knew from experience that little would come of it without clear evidence of physical assault. But the documentation mattered. Patterns mattered. Each incident recorded was one more data point in a larger picture. Over the following days, the pattern became clearer. Cadets who associated with Marcus faced increasing harassment. Nothing overt enough to trigger official intervention, but a constant pressure of small indignities and intimidations. Zavik himself remained conspicuously absent from these incidents, his friends and supporters acting as proxies while he maintained plausible deniability. Marcus watched it happen with growing frustration. The system that had failed to punish Zavik adequately was now failing to protect those who supported basic justice. He considered various responses, from confronting Zavik directly to escalating through official channels, but each option seemed likely to make things worse rather than better. The breaking point came during a joint tactical exercise 3 weeks later. The exercise involved multiple cadet squads working together to complete a complex mission scenario in the Academy's combat simulation facility. Marcus's squad was paired with another that included several of Zavik's associates, a combination that Instructor Vrel had approved despite Marcus's quiet concerns. The scenario involved securing a hostile station while minimizing civilian casualties. It required coordination, trust, and effective communication between squad members. Within the first 20 minutes, it became clear that Zavik's friends had no intention of cooperating. They ignored Marcus's tactical suggestions, failed to provide covering fire when requested, and generally sabotaged the exercise at every opportunity. When Marcus's squad was pinned down by simulated enemy fire, the other squad simply watched rather than providing the flanking support they had been assigned. It was a simulation, so no one was in real danger, but the message was clear. In a real combat situation, they would let Marcus die. After the exercise, which ended in mission failure and a scathing review from the instructors, Marcus found himself once again in Commander Telvik's office. The commander looked even more tired than he had after the tribunal, his 3 eyes showing the strain of weeks spent trying to maintain order in an increasingly divided cadet corps. I am aware of what is happening, Telvik said without preamble. The harassment, the intimidation, the deliberate sabotage of training exercises. I have documented 17 separate incidents in the past 3 weeks. Then why hasn't anything been done about it? Marcus asked, frustration breaking through his usual restraint. Because, Telvik said heavily, Admiral Varkas has filed formal complaints claiming that any disciplinary action against his son's associates constitutes harassment based on the tribunal verdict. He has powerful allies in Federation Command who are pressuring Academy leadership to avoid any appearance of bias against Zavik or those loyal to him. Marcus absorbed this in silence. The system wasn't just broken. It was actively being manipulated to protect the guilty while punishing the innocent. What am I supposed to do? He finally asked. Telvik studied him for a long moment. You have 3 options, Cadet Chen. First, you can request transfer to a different training facility. Second, you can resign from the Academy entirely. Third, you can continue as you are, knowing that the situation is likely to worsen before it improves. Is there a fourth option where justice actually happens? Not one I can currently see, Telvik admitted. I am sorry, Cadet. You deserved better than this. Marcus sat in silence, thinking about the choice before him. Transferring or resigning felt like admitting defeat, letting Zavik and his supporters win, but continuing meant enduring ongoing harassment with no end in sight, potentially putting himself and those who supported him at risk. Neither option was acceptable. There is another way, Marcus said slowly, an idea forming as he spoke. What if I stop reacting the way they expect? Telvik's middle eye focused sharply on him. Explain. They want me to either fight back or run away. Both options confirm their narrative about humans being either violent or weak. What if I do neither? What if I just keep being exactly what a Federation officer should be, regardless of what they do? That is what you have been doing, Cadet. No, sir. I've been enduring. That's passive. I'm talking about being actively Castian. Not just good enough to get by, but so competent that they can't ignore me. So professional that their harassment looks petty by comparison. So committed to Federation ideals that I become the example everyone else is measured against. Telvik leaned back in his chair. You understand that will not stop the harassment. It may even intensify it. I understand. But it changes the story from Deathworlder causing problems to excellent cadet being harassed for no reason. It makes the truth unavoidable. A ghost of a smile crossed Telvik's features. You are either remarkably wise or remarkably stubborn, Cadet Chen, possibly both. Over the following months, Marcus executed his plan with determined precision. He studied harder, trained longer, and performed better than he ever had before. When assigned to squads with hostile cadets, he completed his responsibilities perfectly, regardless of whether they completed theirs. When harassment occurred, he documented it calmly and continued with his duties. When opportunities arose to demonstrate leadership or expertise, he seized them without hesitation. The results were gradual but undeniable. His scores climbed into the top 10% of his class across every metric. Instructors began using his tactical analyses as examples in advanced courses. His physical training times improved to levels that impressed even the Korathian cadets who had previously dismissed human capabilities. More importantly, the contrast between Marcus's conduct and his harassers became impossible to ignore. While he excelled, they stagnated or declined. Their energy focused on petty revenge rather than professional development. While he assisted other cadets and volunteered for difficult assignments, they isolated themselves in their clique of resentment. The narrative was shifting, not through dramatic confrontation, but through consistent demonstration of what a real soldier looked like. 6 months after the tribunal, Marcus was selected for an elite tactical training program usually reserved for second-year cadets. The announcement was made during a general assembly, and the applause from most of the cadet corps was genuine and enthusiastic. Marcus stood to accept the recognition, his eyes scanning the crowd and finding the faces that mattered most. Lyra, beaming with pride. Pix, whose confidence had grown alongside Marcus's success. Commander Telvik, nodding with quiet approval. And Zarvik, his scaled features twisted with impotent rage, watching someone he had tried to destroy instead flourish. That evening, Marcus stood at the observation deck where he had spent many quiet hours over the past months. Kelmora Prime rotated below, its rings catching the light of distant stars. He thought about the person he had been when he first arrived at the academy. Idealistic and uncertain, hoping to prove that a human could succeed in the Federation military. He thought about the 3 shots that had changed everything, the moment when he could have become something else, someone driven by revenge and anger. He thought about the choice he had made to absorb those shots and respond with restraint rather than retaliation. It had not been easy. There had been moments when he questioned whether restraint was strength or weakness, whether holding on to his principles mattered when the system seemed determined to punish him for them. But standing here now, having earned recognition through excellence rather than violence, Marcus knew he had chosen correctly. The door behind him opened and Lyra stepped onto the observation deck. She had made a habit of finding him here when he needed to think, offering companionship without demanding conversation. "They are saying you will graduate at the top of your class if you maintain your current trajectory," she said, standing beside him and looking out at the rings. "That's not why I'm doing this," Marcus replied. "I know. That is exactly why you will succeed." They stood in comfortable silence for a while before Lyra spoke again. "What Zarvik did to you was wrong. What the tribunal allowed to happen was wrong. The harassment you have endured has been wrong. Do you ever regret not shooting him when you had the chance?" Marcus considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," he admitted, "when things were hardest, when the harassment was worst, there were moments I wished I had ended it differently. But then I remember who I would have had to become to pull that trigger. I would have had to be someone who killed when there were other choices. That's not who I want to be, even knowing what it cost you. Especially knowing what it cost me. The cost was high, but the price of becoming that other person would have been higher." Lyra nodded thoughtfully. "You have taught us something important, Marcus Chen. You have shown that strength is not just about what you can do, but about what you choose not to do. That a Deathworlder is not defined by the death their world prepared them for, but by the life they choose to live despite that preparation." Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a weight he had been carrying since the incident finally easing. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For understanding. For standing with me when it wasn't easy. For being the kind of soldier the Federation is supposed to create." They remained on the observation deck as the station's night cycle deepened. 2 cadets from different worlds who had found common ground in shared values. Around them, The Academy continued its eternal mission of training the next generation of Federation officers, some who would learn the lessons Marcus had taught and some who would not. But in this moment, standing above the rings of Kelmora Prime with a friend beside him and his principles intact, Marcus felt something he had not felt since 3 shots were fired at the wrong target. He felt hope. Hope that the Federation could be what it claimed to be. Hope that justice delayed was not necessarily justice denied. Hope that the choice between who you are and who you could become was always worth making, even when the cost was high. 3 shots had been fired. All 3 had missed their intended target, but what they had hit instead was far more significant. They had hit a moment of choice, a decision point where Marcus Chen could have become someone defined by violence and revenge. He had chosen differently, and in doing so, had shown an entire academy what it really meant to be strong. The Deathworlder Cadet had responded, not with the death his world had prepared him for, but with the life he had chosen to live. And that response, quiet and patient and persistent, would echo through the halls of the Vraxan Military Academy long after the sound of those 3 shots had faded into memory.